if it's consistent with your mission, and you can get bundle those resources to good effect, I believe.
Frank Torres, I'm from Earthmine based in Geneva. Unfortunately, Earthmine's not a private bank, so there's no funding here. I like the presentations as well, excellent. Just thinking out of the box on the Madagascar presentation, 50 million invested through a private bank in Geneva, JP Morgan, and then needing to get involved in private sector partnerships now. Well, actually it already is. It has a private partner in its investment side. It's invested in private companies with its $50 million. Maybe there's an opportunity in innovation and something like the Madagascar Fund could invest in Rio Tinto, working in Madagascar, so that you could see them then being able to do some shareholder activism with the company that's active in the country. Rio Tinto might even welcome it. And so there could be a way to use the investment capital strategically to support the protected areas program in addition to the money that you spend every year.
Okay, thanks. Yes? Oh, someone's bringing a microphone for you.
Thank you very much. I would like to share, Mexico has finished the gap analysis, the financial gap analysis exercise, and I would like to share some things that might put all this within a context.
Ron, can you present yourself first?
Oh, sorry. I'm Juan Besori from Mexico. I work in TNC. Okay, so we carried out this gap analysis with the Mexican government, and the bottom line is that the biggest amount we're gonna be needing for financing is gonna be from the least innovative source. Basically, the country has to pay the bill for its protected areas, and that I think is going to be the case in many of all the other countries. Having said this, I would like to highlight the role of outside investment. By outside, I mean everything outside the government. Conservation trust funds are great. In Mexico, the Mexican Conservation Trust Fund helped to jumpstart the whole protected area management system. It had a lock in it where it would not invest in the 10 initial areas if the government did not put at least 5 persons in the ground. So that started building up the whole working of the Fondo Mexicano and their support for protected areas. But fortunately, the government has been increasing the investment in protected areas, and the trust fund accounts for 1% of the investment of protected areas. And I'm talking about a 60 million plus capital funds that provide, and luckily it's been producing interest around 6-7% per annum. So it's a well-invested fund. But again, it's small with the overall investment, which is currently covered by the government and by other outside investment. Foreign investment from foundations, multilaterals, bilaterals, are important, but as Julian said, they are like bumps. You get them, they disappear, you get them, they disappear. So the real innovative thing is how to get the government investment to become a reality. In many countries, social investment is and should become the most important component of protected area management after the basic management costs are met. Here, you have to think innovatively of all the other agencies within the country, fisheries, agriculture, forestry, that can help you with little tweaks to work towards sustainable use of resources and meet the conservation objectives of protected areas. So I wouldn't say conservation trust is better than project-specific finance or than direct management, the investment, or other agencies' investment in protected areas. I think we should utilize all in the financing toolbox and have the protected areas should be sustainable finance over the future with all the different arrays of things, entrance fees, whatever, everything counts in different measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Edwin?
Thank you very much for the presentations. I have a question and a thought. Now, what happens is, if you look at most of the conservation funds, and I'm happy Jeff is represented here, the primary focus is on private or NGO-driven funds. Then we have the public sector funds. And of course, as mentioned in Mexico, governments are committing themselves to actually increase their support towards conservation. But then we're also getting governments that are committing themselves to go towards creating their own conservation funds in recognition of the fact that we need to invest more in conservation. But then sometimes when the funds are not available, it doesn't wait until funds will be there to conserve. Now, in terms of working and changing this thinking that it's project, it's now, as opposed to a conservation fund that will be there for a longer time, how come that most of the support doesn't seem to be heading towards the government side to support conservation trust funds? And I'm asking this because in Kenya, where I come from, we have the Kenya Wildlife Service Fund. We've indeed raised internally about $1 million US, but every time you speak to our other partners, they always say it's public fund, and that one we don't want to touch. So if we don't want to go that other side, does it mean that only funds are supposed to be made for the private sector or the NGO-driven funds?
Yoko, you want to? I can answer that, but I don't know if Yoko would have a comment from the GEF perspective.
Why don't you start it?
Well, let me start, all right. It would, just to be.
President Edwin is from Kenya Wildlife Service in Kenya first. Okay?
To be just really blunt, we have a lot of cases of state funds failing miserably. That is, being established, money being put into the funds, but because that money was there and it's hard to, sometimes manage a crisis, we'll just borrow a bit here, we'll borrow a bit there, and it's like the neighbor who borrows and doesn't bring back anything, and so that's one of the problems that happens. So that has been the problem, and we have a history of that. And so the idea evolved about trying to create entities that, in the case of the Madagascar Fund, you heard that it's totally private. Many funds have a mixture, so that government does have some input into making decisions. I don't know how to shut this off. Anyway, sorry. Okay, thank you. So, technologically challenged here. But, so there is some of that to try to balance that, and the fact that, and I think as Yoko had said, if these funds are created with a goal of reaching the objectives, similar objectives to what the government's trying to achieve, that helps to create a partnership. And I think that if we can build that kind of partnership, if we can create institutions that have a lot of transparency and a lot of accountability, that can work really well. And I think sometimes, I remember having many of these discussions, that there's a bit of resentment. Well, why does it have to be a private fund? Don't you trust us in government? necessarily a question of trust. It's just that there have been a lot of, in the past, problems, and there's a lot of concerns. And so it's a question of where you feel most comfortable putting your money, really, and where you would feel that you're likely to have it managed in possibly a better way, where you may not have changes. In politics, there are changes all the time. Where in your fund, you may have more stability in your administration and management. And so those longer term benefits are significant, I think, in terms of people making those decisions. So and that's just, my point of view. Again, I'm sorry I'm a little bit blunt there, but I think that it's a reality, and we've seen those things happen in the past.
Well, just to thank you, Ray, for making it very clear. But at the same time, I just wanted to add that the GF really don't have restriction on what kind of fund we fund or not. I mean, that's not the point. I mean, we learn lessons from what we have done. And as Ray put it bluntly, and also some of our experience has been that, yes, a mixed board structure and a fund has worked. Even from my experience looking at the project implementation, that is definitely a trend that I can really share. So, I mean, we are open to different funds based on different country situation. And, but we definitely want to learn lessons from our experience, and we built proposals, newer proposals based on that. Thank you.
The questions?
Thank you very much. I'm representing Transponder Joint Secretariat in Southern Caucasus, which is a project financed by German government through KfW. And also, let me share our experience, the experience of my country in this case. So, in Georgia also operates Caucasus Nature Fund, which probably most of you know about it. So, and just I want to mention that this is really very successful, successfully implemented project. And it covers 50% of the operational costs, expenses of each protected areas, and the second 50% comes to the government. So this is a very good cooperation mechanism. And besides that, also I would mention that the German projects are also in a very good cooperation with each other. So, for example, my organization, which is TGS, Transponder Joint Secretariat, helps to the Agency of Protected Areas, which is in Georgia, so in improving financial mechanism to receive the funds from CNF, so Caucasus Nature Fund. So this is very good cooperation, not only between these funds, trust fund and the government, also between the project financed through KfW and German government. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think, yes, this is very interesting to see that there is an organization which is able at the regional level to be able to facilitate the use of the different tools. And I think, yeah, that would be very much interesting to perhaps showcase your experience, because we know also a lot of countries where it's very much difficult to get this. We have several examples in our countries where it's very, very much difficult to bring all the people together to agree on where the funds are going. Where do I put the funds? Well, that's very interesting, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for the presentation. My name is Ram Rana. I'm from Nepal. I work for an NGO. I would like to have a question regarding this. Since this the funding is done at a program level, do you have set up indicators, by when you decide that it's time to move on to, let's say, next conservation area, next protected area, and basically set up indicators for the exit strategy?
Okay, I will try perhaps to answer, but perhaps some manager or fund could perhaps give some more details. If I understand well your point or your questions, it's about how a fund decides to finance a site, and what are the indicators to decide to stop and then to stop to finance something else, to move to another protected area. Well, Sound, you because they have an operational manual for that, and it's interesting to share how it works.
Yes, it's called a prioritization, so we have to prioritize the protected areas based on a calculation of its biodiversity and the scientific elements, need, and also it's a capacity to absorb the contribution. And this was a very difficult decision to make, how to decide how to list the protected areas. And also, as I said, since they tripled the protected areas of Madagascar, there were a lot of new ones that didn't really have much data, so they were just penalized for not having a lot of scientific data that could give them a good score on biodiversity and so on. So it's a little bit, it was controversial, it was a difficult setting of the priorities, which is also perhaps why some of the donors decided that they were going to, because they had funded certain protected areas in Madagascar for 20 years. The KFW funded those 5, to which we manage the sinking fund. So they say those are the protected areas and we don't care about the priority strategy. And so, and especially also in a country like Madagascar, the data is insufficient. We don't know. If you went to the presentation that Russ Mittelmeier gave yesterday, we're continuing to discover new species every day. And so to say that one protected area has more biodiversity than another is difficult to say affirmatively today.
I think Alberto also.
Okay. Just a compliment on the case of the Atlantic Forest Fund. The decision-making lies within the government. So the federal law for for protected areas has a set of priorities, and the state has to have similar priorities. They are in coordination, and they decide where to allocate the funds. Fumbio has other types of funds and projects, and the decision-making is different in each case, but in the Atlantic Forest, it's the government.
Yes, thank you. I'm Alberto Paniagua, the Executive Director of the Peruvian Trust Fund for National Parks. Concerning the question, well, we have had over time some problems of institutional identity, at the very beginning especially. And finally, we are not meant to make the priorities setting for the allocation of our financial resources. We have a national authority, we have a national park service. So it is the national park service who each year work with us, and they decide the priorities, where to put the money and how. So what we do is to assess if those priorities are fit our own strategic views, and finally we agree with the government in the priority setting that it is the government who actually does the work. Okay, that's the way we do it. Otherwise, we can be seen as an institution trying to replace the national authorities. We are a private institution, and we are supposed to be kind of a strategic financial tool for the national system of protected areas. So we are contributing for the sustainability of the financing for protected areas. But let me tell you something else. We have learned in our experience that sustainable financing is not only a question of money. Even if we have all the money to fulfill the gap that we have found out, that money normally cannot be executed because the institutional capacities are small. So we have learned that we need to work not only financing some activities or programs or projects, but also creating institutional and human capacities. Sometimes in our experience, we have had more money available in 1 year than the capacities have our national institutions. So that's something very important to see. It's not only a question to fulfill the gap, but to develop the institutional capacities.
So I don't know if it's clear now, but I think, we are trying to find out the best practices. I think what we know is that really, desk conservation trust want to be efficient, needs to be aligned with the national policy, try to work with national agencies for protected areas, but they still need, and that comes back to the question of Edwin, needs to have a board, an independent board, to be able to make the good decisions. And at the difference of a purely administrative way of financing the protected area systems, perhaps they will get some priority for protected area, but they will have the independence to allocate the funds according to the absorptive capacity, to assess what are the best way to help the protected area, and to help to perhaps even negotiate the best project and how to finance.